It's not recording. I'm not sure we're live yet. Do we have to record? Shall I just proceed?
I can turn the camera on this one. But it should be fine.
It's pointing up a laptop at you.
Yeah, that one doesn't affect this. Let me start
I'd like to welcome everybody to the Cincinnati Public Schools Audit Committee meeting. With 100% attendance, correct? Unprecedented. Thank you everybody for showing up. One item is now on consultant DKD requested another month to do that. So, very important that it's not on the agenda. So first thing on the agenda is an update to the board policy as it relates to the charter. It should be in front of everybody, over your packet. Significant changes are redlined. That being the Finance Committee name has been changed to the Budget, Finance, and Growth Committee throughout the document. And then we also talk about all members must reside within the Cincinnati Public School District boundaries, which is relevant because we received 2 applications to join the audit committee, one of whom was from a resident of Bond Hill, and the other one was a resident outside the city. I think he lives in Indian Hill. So, okay, so that's the second change. And then on page 2, it talks about many responsibilities. I think we went over this at the last meeting. It has to do with, electing the chair and the vice chair. And then the final change is that it is expected that audit committee members attend all meetings. If any member misses 2 consecutive meetings, their membership will be discussed by the audit committee at the second missed meeting. And that was a change that I wanted added in to make sure we had good attendance, because we really need a quota to make any decisions. Does anybody have any questions about the revisions to the audit committee's charter as it's presented? Okay. It does not count towards meeting a quorum. I would say the answer to that is need to be. And you're not necessarily off the committee, but we're gonna discuss it. Anybody have anything to add to that?
Yeah. I think the issue is that we had a few meetings where we didn't meet quorum because people were attending via teleconference, and we can't make recommendations, make decisions without quorum. So we felt the need to put this in so that we could ensure members attend. Now, there's obviously going to be extenuating circumstances, and you can still contribute if you attend via teleconference. However, if we're getting close to not meeting quorum and we can't do what we need to do as a body, I think that's the issue at hand and why we recommended putting that in there.
I mean, this is, I believe, Ohio Revised Code for public entities in meetings. So it would be a change by the state legislature body and affect every public entity within the state. So I don't think that that's an effort that this group should take on. So while that's the rule, I think that we have to just abide by being a public entity, and it means attending in-person meetings.
Good question, Jennifer.
Just
Okay.
to follow up, it's the rules that obviously the school board has to abide by. However, we have made some accommodation for situations where members are unable to attend but can attend virtually. But they, as you just mentioned, they can't count towards a quorum and they cannot vote. However, we do allow our board members to at least sit in on the meetings and even participate in the discussion, but not for a quorum and not obviously for a vote. So it's we've found that that is still within the spirit and maybe not letter of the state law, but that might be something to contemplate.
Yes, Dave.
Can someone remind me how many members we need for a quorum?
7? Okay, that's the answer. Any further discussion on the changes to the audit committee charter? Do I have a motion to approve the revisions as presented? Do I have a second? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, the next item on the agenda is the audit committee new member selection. As I said before, we received two resumes of people that wanted to join the audit committee. Paul Kitzmiller, who is a resident of Bond Hill, submitted a very comprehensive resume and all the necessary paperwork. And the other person was Molly Meekin Rogers, who's a professor at the University of Cincinnati. I called Paul and talked to him. I said, just tell me that you're going to show up at the meetings. And he said he would. He seemed like a very smart guy. And since Molly Meekin Rogers does not reside within the city, we really only have one candidate. So can I make a motion? I guess I can. I move to add Paul Kitzmiller to the audit committee. Do I have a second?
Yeah, can we discuss for just 1 second? Because I think we probably have a procedural issue. The committee charter is not approved by us, it's approved by the board, is that correct? So procedurally, I think we do not have a charter that says you must live inside the city at this moment. However, I think as a group, we should acknowledge that and that we're expecting that to be approved and that by January 1, Molly Rogers would not be eligible. So therefore we should consider that in our discussion before we make any recommendations.
Yeah, that's correct, Dan. The one conversation you could have potentially, we were just thinking through, in what situation could Molly Rogers possibly be eligible? There could be an opportunity for the committee to say the person must reside within 10 miles of the city school district or something like that. But it depends on what we really want. Do we want a taxpayer? Do we want a voter? And if so, we really do want that person to reside within district boundaries. But just to put that option out there, that is something the committee could consider.
I would prefer not to spend time debating this at this point. Okay, I mean, we've approved these changes to the charter, and even though they're not technically approved, I don't think we want to revisit this at this point.
I'm not suggesting we revisit it. I'm just suggesting we address it so that in our public records, we aren't showing that we're adhering to a rule that we haven't had approved. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, that's fine. So I move once again to accept Paul Kitzmiller as a member of the Cincinnati Public Schools Audit Committee. Do I have a second for that? Okay. Yes. Is there any further discussion? Okay, Melanie?
Yes, I do want to disclose that I'm going to be recusing myself because Paul is my son-in-law. So right now we're immediate family members, but I wholeheartedly endorse my son-in-law. He's my best friend and the father of my 3 grandkids, and two of his children are in Cincinnati Public Schools. So he has my endorsement.
Okay. So I guess all in favor of adding Paul? Okay.
I'd like to just add that I think with Melanie coming off of the board, I think that we should discuss a conflict of interest if she were to remain on the board. She's coming off the board, and I think that's an important point to bring up, and I think we should all just acknowledge that.
Okay. Well, I just. He said, he'll make every effort to attend. I guess he's the controller at a casino right now. Yeah. Belterra Park. He seemed like, he seemed like a bright guy. He sort of knew what I was going to say before I said what I call the family feud test. I asked a neighbor of his that I know lives in Bonneville, Paddock Hills, I'm sorry, Paddock Hills. He had nothing but nice things to say about him. He's an accountant. And my sense is he'd be a good addition. I mean, what's the option, Jim, that we don't accept anybody? I mean, okay. It was short and to the point. I said, Paul, we'd like you to join the audit committee, or at least I'd like, I received your application. I'm going to present it to the audit committee members. But before I do so, I want to make sure that you will be willing to show up at the meetings and, get involved. And he said, of course. Relatively short discussion, to tell you the truth. So, it was a short discussion because he was the only candidate. I mean, okay. Any other questions about Paul Kitzmiller?
As we go through this, I think the interview process needs to be a little more detailed and not necessarily he's our only candidate. So I want you to be on the school board. I think it needs to be an interview process. That's just feedback, that's all.
Okay, so noted. Good point. So I made a motion to accept him on the audit committee. Jim Cross seconded. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Okay.
Recusing myself for
Okay.
the record.
Okay, thanks, Melanie. So do we have to reappoint all the existing members? I'm not sure if that is something we need to do.
So if you look at the document titled Member Appointment Timeline, up at the very top, you'll see there are two members, David Foote and yourself, Tim Heldman, are up for reappointment. And the new 3-year term would begin January 1st of 2022 and conclude at the end of the year, 12/31/2024. So if the two new members would like to continue serving with us, as we hope they do, we can have a motion perhaps proposed by neither of the members and an approval. And then ultimately, if we move forward with all three of these members, Paul being the new member, that will all go through as a resolution through the board approval.
Sort of heard half of that. So what do we need to do, Lauren? Do I need to propose?
I'll make a motion to reappoint David and Tim, and I'll ask for a second. Seconded. So all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Okay. So we'll put those three forward to the board for approval.
Correct. And just to confirm, all three will share the same term of the 2022 through 2024.
Okay. So Eve, I have your name next to this. Did you want to say something, or did I steal your thunder on the agenda? Okay. So I guess, okay, I am currently the chair. I'm willing to serve for another year. Does anybody else want to be the chair of the committee? Okay. Dan, at the present time, is the vice chair. Does anybody else want to run to be the vice chair of the committee? Okay, so I guess, so subject to the approval of the school board, I guess I'm still the chair and Dan's the vice chair, if it's approved by the board.
You would be closing nomination with those two names, and then we can vote on each individual one, even though they've been submitted as two. Close the nominations, and then
Okay,
we can vote.
okay. Nominations are closed. All in favor of keeping Tim Heldman as the chairman and Dan Holthouse as the vice chairman of the audit committee, signify by saying aye. Any opposed?
That has to be an actual vote rather than a voice vote.
Okay, so all in favor of Tim Heldman, one by one, or can we just hold our hands up?
So I can go through and read the names, and then you can say aye or nay, and then I will mark you as such.
Okay,
So I'll start down the
one-
roster. So Tim Heldman,
Aye.
Daniel Holthouse,
Aye.
Jennifer Kauser, James Crossett.
Yeah.
You have your formal names. Christine Fisher,
Aye.
David Foote,
Aye.
Elizabeth Guthridge,
Aye.
Carol Mitchell Lawrence,
Aye.
Clarice Warner, Eve Bolton,
Aye.
Melanie Bates, Ryan Messer. Thank you.
An abstention. Okay, so I guess, Lauren, you're on with the audit status report, and then you're going to talk about your mid-year evaluation.
Ms. Bates just reminded me we need to vote on Dan as well for vice chair. So we'll run that real quick again, if you don't mind. So all those in favor for Dan Holthouse as vice chair of the audit committee. We'll start with Tim Hellman. Dan Holthouse,
Aye.
Jim Cowther, Jim Crossett, Christine Fisher, David Foote,
Aye.
Liz Guthridge, Carol Mitchell Lawrence, Clarice Warner, Eve Bolton, Melanie Bates, Ryan Messer. Thank you. So if you don't mind navigating over to the audit status report, we'll just do a very quick update. This is also in your packets as this document with the cover. So in terms of the progress of our audits, we are continuing to work with the BKD folks as well as the benefits team, as Mr. Heldman mentioned before. They plan to conclude their work throughout the rest of this month and ultimately report to this committee in February of 2022 at our next meeting. The date, as you see, I should make a quick note, the date of the 2022 meetings will be determined at the start of calendar year 2022 by the new board. So as soon as we get those, I'll send those out to you as well. And then in terms of our assurance projects, we are currently working on our accounts payable audit. That is going to be one of our larger projects of the year, and that is well underway. In terms of the other assurance project is our asset inventory counts. We're projecting to perform that work in the early months of this spring 2022, but we are getting that plan laid now so that we are ready to execute when the time comes. And with the addition of Emma Williams to our team, we have been furthering our work on the data analytics and continuous auditing. Of course, that's going to be an ongoing multi-year plan and project as we continue to develop the internal audit department. And then as we move on to the follow-up projects, we are actually doing two projects concurrently right now, which is something that we haven't been able to do in the past with a smaller team. But now that we have a full complement of staff, we're able to do numerous projects at once. And so procurement card audit is one that we are re-performing, but also expanding upon what we initially tested. So not only to give us a pulse of how well the first set of recommendations have been implemented, but also to help get them to the next level. And we believe that the Treasurer's Office, as well as the purchasing department, has come a long way, and they're continuing to push forward in this area. So the payroll audit is the other follow-up audit that was recommended by this committee in our June meeting to be added to the plan. And so this is going to be the other significant project of the year. So kind of as we think through things, accounts payable and payroll are the biggest. And then the procurement card and the asset projects are a little bit smaller. While they're all sizable in nature, that's kind of the way we're rolling through the work. Is our goal is to complete AP and the procurement card by the February meeting, and then complete payroll and the asset count by our April meeting. So that way we'll have all 4 projects done by the end of the year. So the end of the year is a little bit more heavily backloaded, honestly, because we were getting our staffing aligned, but we are confident and have a strong plan to complete things by the end of the year. And then just a final note around the preschool workforce development task, as well as the policy review. Both of those projects have concluded, and they will report to the respective committees. The preschool workforce will be updated at the finance committee on Thursday, and the policy review will be updated at the policy and equity committee on Thursday morning. And then final notes in terms of our external audits. We have some good news to share that both the audits that you see here in your packet performed by the Ohio Auditor of State over SERS and STRS, our respective pensions, came back as compliant. And I don't know if our treasurer or director of financial reporting would like to make any additional comments on that. Yeah, so it's great news. So I think I was the point of contact when they performed this audit back in 2016, and then Kevin Ashley, our director of financial reporting and transparency, led the work this year. And as Jen said, fortunately, both of those came back compliant and no issues to report. So that concludes the audit status report. Any questions before I move on to my mid-year evaluation?
I have a quick question.
Yes.
How did you do the board policy review audit?
Pardon?
How did you do the board policy review audit?
Absolutely, that's a great question. So this was a tricky request, as it's something we hadn't done before. And I know in speaking with our chair and vice chair, we wanted to do our best to try to provide some feedback to the policy and equity committee, even though this isn't a traditional audit per se. So what we did is we took all 4 policies and broke them out by each aspect and requirement, and identified who is the point of contact. Do we have an owner for that aspect of the policy? What have they done to date? What do they plan to do? Are there written procedures? Are there data to support this? And ultimately, do we feel that this policy is functioning as intended? And we actually let management go ahead and answer those questions, and we had conversations throughout that process. So ultimately, I don't want to get ahead of reporting, as I'm still going through the review with the superintendent. I do believe there are next steps in terms of management kind of going through that exercise themselves as well, and further expanding upon those answers. So I think in future, what we'll recommend is if the policy committee would like us to review policies, that we first ask management to go through and do the exercise that we led this time. So that way we can say who owns things, who do we speak with, and really is this policy at the point of implementation that we have criteria and we have data to really be able to evaluate. So that's kind of our stance. I think it was a good first run through, but I think we would do things a little bit differently if to be more effective in the future.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else have any questions about the audit status report for Lauren?
Thank you. And so moving right along, the other document you have is this memo regarding my mid-year evaluation. I believe we are on target and we are completing things as expected. I won't go through this in too much detail unless anyone would like me to. This is somewhat similar to, or it is exactly the same as what we do twice a year. So I do appreciate your participation, and I do sincerely ask for your feedback, because as we continue to develop not only the internal audit department, but also this audit committee, we really want your feedback, your direction, because I think we are truly making great strides. So any input you'd like to provide, if you could send it to Tim Heldman. And I think the date I requested, just to keep things moving before the holidays, is if you could send him any feedback by Tuesday, December 21st, then he will compile the feedback, complete the page on the very back, and send that over to Dr. Ross Tarpo, who is our Director of Talent and Staffing. Then that will be entered, and then we'll do this exercise again come the final evaluation in April. So if there are things you'd like to see us course correct and things of that nature between now and April, we really appreciate the feedback. I would really appreciate the feedback, I should say.
I'll be
And that concludes.
I'll be submitting that on December 21st. So if you have any comments, please forward them to me. Okay, very succinct. Thank you, Lauren. Okay, financial updates. Jennifer, I see you're out there. Yeah, there you are. Okay.
I think you said him and Kevin.
Well,
Kim Hughes, who's the assistant treasurer.
yeah.
We kind of worked together on the 5-year forecast presentation. So, sorry, I heard him. First, I'll go over the October financials, and I'm just going to briefly go over this page. And you have all the detail in your packet, but I'll expand a little further when I go over the 5-year forecast information. The key thing on this section is really nothing unexpected. Things are on track based on the biggest change is the state funding. And we've talked about that a little bit, I think, before. But I'll talk about that in the forecast. But our cash balances are up. And like I said, revenues and expenditures are affected by that, those changes in the state budget. The school-wide pool is up. The expenditures are up, which is primarily due to salaries and benefits related to changes in the collective bargaining agreements. And one of the key things about talking about preschool students that are funded through the tuition assistance program, for October this year were 833 students versus 584 at this point last year. So obviously overall preschool student numbers are up as well. And then I'll flip over to the 5-year forecast slides. So a couple key points I want to hit here. We have to make some assumptions when we do the 5-year forecast. Obviously, a lot of work goes into the budget for the current year, and in terms of enrollment and other things, we have to project those out in the future. But one of the stumbling blocks we've had this year is ODE was supposed to provide detailed data as to how they are going to fund the formula in this current fiscal year. And while it was originally supposed to come, I believe, in October, they then pushed it out to December, and we're still actually waiting on that data. So some of the assumptions in the forecast, will be updated once we get that information from them. Just to highlight a few purposes of the forecast, it's to monitor and report the district's solvency. It only focuses on the general fund, which is the way it is set up to be. It supports our financial transparency. It's a tool to plan for future financial decision making. The format of it is standardized by the Ohio Department of Education. We show 3 years of historical, a current year budget, and then 4 additional years of forecasted information. It's required to be filed twice a year, so we do a November forecast, and then we do a May update. Some of the key factors influencing the forecast are the Fair School Funding Plan that was partially implemented in this current fiscal year, or in this current state budget. Obviously, inflationary rates. As you know, the district has received a lot of CARES funding that is being used, and we have a very detailed plan for that. But some of the things that were implemented as part of that plan, if they continue beyond that plan, they'll need to come back into the general fund or another source like a grant funding source. So one thing if you look at the details in the forecast in those out 4 and 5 year, you'll see a lot of those expenditures come back. The administration and the board will be making decisions about which of those initiatives they want to continue, find other sources, et cetera. But that is a key thing that goes into this forecast. Student enrollment projections versus what the actual enrollment ends up being obviously will influence our revenue as well. And then any changes to collective bargaining agreements. The next slide just some key things we looked at here. We really can't forecast a negative cash balance in the next 2.5 years, 3 years. And the guidance that's been given by the board is, we're not really looking for any new levies. Obviously, that would affect the forecast as well. But some key things to know going forward, we will have tax levy renewals. And certainly we do need to have those renewals in place. The forecast does kind of capture that. So if a renewal is not to be passed, it shows you the significant effect that could have on our revenues. Another thing, as I mentioned, the Fair School Funding Plan, as proposed, was envisioned to be a 6-year implementation. When the legislature approved the current biennial budget, they put into law 2 years of implementation, but the remaining 4 will need to be approved in future budgets. Another key is controlling the budget and expenditure growth. And then, as I mentioned, those expenditures related to what we refer to as the CLIF plan. The next slide is Fair School Funding Plan. Again, the key thing here, I just want to point out, is one of the changes is the elimination of pass-through funding for community schools and scholarships. So previously, all the kids that lived in the district, we received funding for, and then that funding was passed on if they chose to go to a community school or through one of the state scholarship programs. What they've done is they're looking at who do we educate. So it's district educated. So the revenue is then only based on those kids we educate either through open enrollment or any of those other programs. So while our revenue went down significantly, the expenditures actually went down more. So it's a net positive for the district. Kind of our forecast is going to look funny because you're going to see that dip in revenue, the dip in expenditures, a slight increase overall. Yes.
Questions might be more for. My understanding was that the school board was all the children, not just the
Yeah, they're all our children.
It's still all the children. So of the
They're a responsibility of the school board and state and local funding. But again, once they're elsewhere of the instruction, we still have to provide certain services rather than necessarily hire the teachers in those parochial schools or some of the other private schools or the charter schools. We like to always say they are all our children. And
so that hasn't changed even though the funding.
well, that's interesting because we don't know yet how that, but I'm going to assume that the state will never take responsibilities from us.
Yeah.
Or increase our revenue or opportunity to serve, but this has to play out. But it's remarkable, and the difference, and the public will have to understand the difference in the budget piece and the amount of money that we have or don't have, because we don't do the pass-through, as they're saying. So, but yeah, they're all our kids.
And as Ms. Bolton mentioned, there's certain aspects like transportation that we still receive some funding and will still be involved in that necessity. The next slide. One of the things through the state funding, it calculates a state share. And using the prior model versus the current model, the state share of our funding actually went down from 46 to 43%. And that's kind of based on some wealth and capacity factors that they calculate. Another difference is student wellness funding. Previously, we received that in a restricted fund. Now they kind of cut that down based on the state share funding, and it actually rolls into the general fund. So there's also in the forecast some expenditure shifts for the student wellness expenditures. One of the things Jen had highlighted here was without full implementation, and I know she's spoken to legislators about this as well, is had they fully implemented the phase-ins over this year and next year, we would have received an additional $88 million in funding. So certainly the more advocacy we have for that, the more that will help our district in the end. I'll skip back to slide 6, that one. This again just shows that split of state share versus local share. Of course, the local share is the property taxes primarily, and then state share is this foundation funding. The other one, which I think kind of summarizes everything, is the last graph. This actually shows this current or last year's actual and then the next 5 years. And one of the peach colored bars out here at the end, those would represent the renewal. So if we did not get the renewal that has collections in 24, you could see what the difference would be in revenue. But one of the key things on this graph is if we continue to spend or budget more than we receive, you can see where it would put us in a negative at the end of the 5th year. And that is fairly common. I mean, it's not unusual. If you've looked at our forecasts in the past, that's somewhat consistent, but it is kind of a warning sign that everyone needs to be aware of those things that I mentioned of keeping our cash in a positive position.
Is that just one renewal though that impacts 3 years in that way?
I believe it's 2. Is it just one? Okay, I'm sorry.
That impacts fiscal year 24, so that would be a November 23 ballot.
I think we typically do those kind of an election cycle in advance so that we have opportunities to renew it. But yeah, the collection would actually affect 24. But yeah, I was thinking November 22 would be the next.
So that's the one. Negative.
That is assuming we do get the renewal. But it is, as I mentioned, you'll see those last 2 bars are expenditures quite a bit higher based on that, bringing those expenditures back from the CLIF plan. So that's one area that some of that shift would be helpful. But as you can see, even for 22 at the moment, you know, our budget, assuming, you know, there are unfilled positions, there's some other things that won't come to fruition, hopefully. But in all likelihood, when we finish 22, it's going to be a little bit closer. But each of those things, they have a compounding effect. So if our budget next year is based on this year and some other factors, you know, you can see how it's going to grow.
That we'll have to make some spending.
You have any other questions? If not, I think that's all I have.
I have a question, Kevin. So I'm looking at this 5-year forecast. Where are you carrying over the beginning balance every year? I guess you're really not, right? I mean, does it show on here how much money we're going to have in the bank?
Are you looking at?
So, I mean, so in other words, at the end of fiscal year 21, we have, I guess, 85,159 in the bank. Million, I'm sorry. Shouldn't that go forward to the, somewhere in the fiscal year 2020 column?
It's line 7020. is the cash balance at June 30.
So at the end of 21, 15 million.
No. Okay, so at the bottom of fiscal year 2021, 85,159,877.
That's happening from a collection line to the
Okay.
cash balance of June 30, 116 million.
Okay, so that's on, okay, there, okay.
So that becomes the beginning.
I gotcha, okay. So basically, this says that we're gonna be negative $129,000 at the end of fiscal year 2026.
If we continue to spend revenues don't. But we have,
So what inflation percentage are you using?
it depends on the line item.
Yeah. I mean, things go south in a hurry.
Historically, we've always understood because when we're building our budgets, those of us who said, well, life happens and we don't get to spend, we don't get to implement. So the last couple of years, we have been underspending our balance, which is helping to push off that deficit.
So at the end of fiscal year 2021, we had $108 million in the bank. What I see there.
That was at the beginning.
It's
And then
116,
116.
452.
I think we forecast.
And
This year, we have a lot.
And the government assistance due to COVID is not on here at all. It's a totally separate fund. But really, we have more than 116 million.
We have to spend the money on the.
Okay.
It can become a cash flow fund.
So you have expenses in here that we're get reimbursed the next fiscal year.
Some of these advances, that's near the end of the year in particular, we advance money out of the general fund to cover any deficits for like CARES Act. And then subsequent to year end, once we get through that process with ODE, we get that money back and we can return it to the general fund. So that line 5020 is the advance out. And then there's also an advance in. So we kind of, in the forecast, assume, the advances are going to equal out, but we don't know at this point what that amount is going to be at the end of the fiscal year.
Okay. Any questions for Kevin from members of the audit committee?
One question.
Jennifer. Okay.
What category is driving? They seem to go up pretty.
Mm-hmm.
So the transfer outline, the 5010, one of the drivers there, we transfer money for some debt service that's general fund, and then classroom fund materials, classroom maintenance. But those are consistent amounts. So the biggest difference there is the school-wide pool transfer. So the majority of our schools fall under that category where there's general fund money put in a pot, a school-wide pool pot, along with like title dollars, and then that's all spent on those schools. So that 244 million from 210 the year before, as Jen mentioned, certain expenditures were down, which kept that full expenditures down. But with collective bargaining increases and those types of things has caused that to be higher for a budget this year.
covered under purchase.
So what are you saying? You're going to buy this equipment instead of lease it? Is that what you're?
Both the carriage one heard a lot more expensive than 7 days. Leases that would be sent out of care back to the general fund. The lease was keeping this thing out.
So the CARES money is going to run out in 2024. Is that what?
And the Cliff plan amounts, I think, are about $60 million between salaries, purchase services, and that kind of thing. So by the end of 25, 26, potentially that's around $60 million that's coming back to the
The
general.
driver there is prior to COVID. Because they were
What line item is that on, Jen?
that's under purchase service as well.
The purchase services were huge in 19, 20, and 20.
That's because of tuition, voucher, tuition charged in the purchase.
So where is that going now?
It's gone because the tax refund is gone.
And then you'll see the state revenue is down. So like the 1040 or the 1035 and the 1040. You can see how those have gone from like 188 to 120 and 22 to 26. So in net, the revenue went down and then the purchase services also.
I got it. Okay. Okay. Any other questions of Kevin or Jennifer, I guess, in the audit committee? Yeah. Okay.
Great question. Heard us to finish it. So they would adopt this new budget. They already have it now. It's going to get through. Well, right now we're evaluating. This is what we thought we were going to spend our money on, but we're not spending here. We're going to ship it there. So we'll readopt. Because we already have guidance from the board on how we're going to make it happen. And so we're phasing the bring back plan so that it doesn't all hit in 1 year. But each year we're going to make decisions about the scope of that spend, whether we're going to bring it back holistically, we're going to reduce it, or we're going to find another funding source. Or not do it at all. But some things, like hopefully at the end of 3 years, we won't be spending as much money on hand sanitizer, masks, and plexiglass dividers, and those kinds of things. And if we are, I'm hoping we'll still get help.
Christine, you had a question?
So speaking of other funding sources, where are we with more details in terms of how the infrastructure and Build Back Better plan will be impacting? I know in particular for the preschool expansion and what's included there versus what details we might have about how it'll be implemented.
We probably need to go through and look. Last I heard was K-12 was greatly.
Yeah, because I mean preschool expansion certainly, or pre-K, universal pre-K is certainly included, which I would imagine would have an impact.
Jim?
I want to follow up on Liz's question. So this forecast does not include that quick decision-making that you're in the process of doing.
It does holistically, so we know that's why you see that big jump in purchase services. But so if we're going to make room for all those nurses, we're gonna make room for the technology. What are we not gonna spend our money on, because we need to close that gap between revenue and budget and forecast and expenditures. And we do that every year with our budget. This just makes an assumption about if things continue, but we wanted to be very transparent about all the stuff that's happening with other grants coming back.
Thank you. When is the next levy on the ballot?
Next November 22.
Okay. Any other questions for Kevin or Jennifer? Okay. I asked for an update on the transportation situation because it's been in the papers. I guess I don't know if Metro fired us or if we fired them, but I had some concerns about bandwidth, ability to transport our students. And so I asked Lauren to add this to the agenda, and Eve graciously agreed to talk about it. So Eve, you have the floor.
Thank you. And I appreciate you putting it on. I would assume that for the rest of this school year, transportation probably needs to be on the audit committee's agenda. It is a difficult situation. Let me just give you some information. And some of this is a result of us thinking about this in different ways. Currently, where we are is not helpful to families or the district, let alone the instruction of our children, period. So what we are doing now, whether it's SORTA or Metro, or whether it's what we're doing, whether it's the bus driver shortage, or whether it's the yellow bus or the van vendors that we use, this is not a successful thing that's occurring. And more importantly, very frankly, the district has not had very much success regarding transportation for over 5 years. This has been a mess for a very long time for many different reasons. And so we are, at this point in time, starting at the beginning, actually reviewing in policy the 3 transportation policies that exist. I'll give you an idea. One is about transportation, one is about vans, and another is about supervision of students. The big policy dates back to 1944. Now, it's been reviewed and revised over time, largely due to Melanie insisting on a kind of a cycling effort to review policies. But what we have now really discovered is that we have depended upon private yellow bus vendors, local ones, and also the city regional transportation folks for more than 85 years. So with SORTA dropping us to a certain extent, and with the confusion, it's even more egregious that that has happened. We have apparently never had our own fleet of buses. That's unusual, and indeed I used to think that maybe 20 some years ago, in the interest of outsourcing, we decided to do that. Well, no, you have to go back before World War II to find out if we even had any, and we didn't. And we have researched it as best we can. So the policies have to change, and whatever we've been doing hasn't worked for several years. Therefore, we have to change what we're doing. To kind of understand it, one of the pivotal points is what to do about 7th and 8th graders, whether they are on a yellow bus or whether they are on Metro. And we don't know where Metro is actually going to be. We have some hope that a new city council will take some responsibility regarding at least the city's appointees to the SORTA board. We know that the commission, county commission, has tried to help us. And we are assuming and hoping that maybe the new city council, because city council and the county commission control who's on the SORTA board. And when SORTA says this to our kids and to this district, after that many years, somebody has to be held accountable on the SORTA board. It can't just be us. We know that the instruction of the kids is at question. We know that we're going to be rated by the state on our attendance and our tardiness. Well, that's just out the door. You might as well hope that you get any kind of a score from the state because our tardiness and our absenteeism has significantly increased with the elimination of the extra routes. And the extra routes go back at least 30 some years. There are more than I'll rush through this. Something we have to understand is that we can't just depend upon the metro piece or the yellow bus piece, because we also have a van component. We also have JFS and those kids that are experiencing homelessness that also have particular requirements that are demanded by the federal government and the state government. We also have a fleet of dedicated rented buses that take care of all of our field trips and take care of our athletic competitions afterward. How do we do that? We're paying, again, another contractor for that. The vans, we have children arrive at school in ambulances. We have kids that are receiving particular kinds of transportation because it's in their IEP. That might be something we can no longer afford. We provide transportation for our high schoolers when, of course, the state does not require us to do so. But we know we have to get our kids to school. As our interim superintendent has said, we can't teach them unless we can get them there. And we're having trouble getting them there now. We spend around, over a number of years, each year, let's say $50 million to do something unsuccessfully. That's what we've been doing. So one of the things besides reviewing and kind of revamping the policy piece is trying to figure out all the pieces of the puzzle. How much responsibility, and it's beyond the cost that we can afford, but are we going to have some kind of control and ownership of some aspects of our transportation system? Are we going to level the political power that we need to get sorted, to reassume its responsibility to the young people in our district and frankly in the county? Another thing that we have to be aware of is that how shall I say it? We don't know as a district, school by school, and I'm ashamed to say this, how our kids are getting to school. Every one of our principals needs to know that is this student arriving by metro? Are they arriving by van? Is it mom and dad that's dropping them off? Are they in a carpool with it? We don't know. And that's a difficult thing to find out, but it can happen at the site level. Until we know how everybody, maybe not this year, because this has just been horrible, what has happened to our kids and our families. It's ridiculous that we don't know how kids get to school. And we can't redesign anything or contemplate doing something new and different until we know that basic fact. And that's what we want to be doing. We want to be surveying so that we know. We want to deal with how are we going to get the 7th and 8th graders there. We want to know and force Metro back into this game because they made a promise to the public and they are denying that promise to our young people and to their oldest partner. Their oldest business partner is Cincinnati Public Schools.
And biggest customer.
Yes. And this is a ridiculous situation, but we have only several months to try to overcome our problems and forge something for the future. And we'll need advice. I distinctly remember when we were doing even our Healthy Starts. It was really the community that put together some of the experts to help us figure out how to do it. Of course, then Metro made the Healthy Start so late for their own routes that it became counterproductive for especially our athletic kids and the kids that stay after school, which is another issue we have to deal with because our kids do need passes to get home or they won't be participating in extracurricular activities. And if they don't participate in extracurricular activities, the reality is that their achievement will fall. There's a direct, at least correlation, not cause and effect, between a kid being able to stay at school, or get there early or stay late or be an extracurricular and their academic achievement. So this is a huge problem. It's a costly problem. It's a crisis in having to resolve it as soon as we possibly can. In Columbus, where they have their own fleet, they toyed for a year and a half with the idea of going regional with their own equivalent of Metro. And about, 40 days or so before school started in Columbus, that's probably unfair, 60 days before school started, they determined that they couldn't count on their Metro system either. So they stayed with their own fleet. The reality for us is that we have to have a mix of all sorts of vehicles, all sorts of services, and we have to figure out how to schedule our kids rather than necessarily always looking at their address. And there's no will on the board to lessen our own responsibility by providing less transportation. But that is something we have to look at. So it's a huge problem. I'm so glad to have found out that you have to go back before World War II to even think about how we depended upon the public transit system. So we'll work it out. We need your help. We need your guidance. And if there is going to be any kind of a special or ad hoc committee created to look at this, which would include the community, we would be asking too that some audit members participate in that effort. But we have a new board coming in, a new mayor, a new city council, and supportive county commission. So it's a big issue, but we have to resolve it for the children and the families.
Eve, have we investigated buying our own buses and running our own station system?
We do periodically because it's always our first answer. It's very expensive, not just to purchase them, but also to have that many employees necessarily, or to do those sorts of things. But I think some aspect of that probably is still on the table. But we can't even think about buying a total full fleet, let alone manning it, maintaining it. But there's got to be some combination. It's almost impossible that we would be able to get our kids to school unless Metro is helping them. That has to be part of the piece, especially for our 9 through 12. So that has to be a focus for us. Thanks for the time.
Thank you, Eve. Does anybody have any questions about transportation for Eve?
Yeah.
Christine?
So from what I understand and what I see through my day job, this is a national issue. We might have a pronounced issue here locally, but schools across the country and industries across the country are struggling with transportation, with both the physical, I don't think there would be enough buses in the entire United States to actually be able to purchase them, is my understanding, and then drivers to be able to get them. There aren't people to be able to find to drive these. So given those two things, I don't think the current yellow bus providers just have a whole bunch of extra yellow buses out there and extra drivers out there sitting around either. I mean, this seems kind of like a right now unsolvable problem if Metro is not at the table. And so that's one of my questions that you've seen on social media, and you can only take that with a grain of salt, is this, that Metro couldn't respond to the RFP because they're not allowed as a public entity to compete for private bids. Can you speak to that a little bit, and whether, was the school district aware of that in terms of the negotiating process with them? The board was, and our general counsel was, and the way, unfortunately, the RFP was written, even with consultation from OSBA's consultant, somehow it did not get written in a way, or I shouldn't say written. We basically asked of the RFP that it be written in as broad a term as possible, for obvious reasons, as there are many different answers possibly to this. What happened was that it was sent to Metro, and it probably shouldn't have been sent to Metro. But again, here's the deal. The reason that this is, how shall I say it? The reason we knew that Metro was unable to do some of what was in the RFP, which went below grade levels, if you will, we knew it because we used our general counsel to prove that Metro's claim that they could not do extra routes was false. Legally false. And it's a particular rule, and when we had general counsel explain that to us,
it was interesting that we found that that was a claim they made that was wrong. But the major reason is that the federal government has rules and regulations that doesn't allow public transportation to compete with private vendors. So that you have to have a special situation for that, which was our extra routes, which were perfectly legal for 30 some years. What happened is that the RFP was sent and Metro grabbed it, and that was the door that was left open, and they took advantage of it. But currently we have a complete, if you will, interim situation within our transportation department. So that's just people that have tried to come to the rescue. But again, we've lost some experts, and very frankly, part of our problem in transportation originally was personnel. So these people that are now working it and trying to get us through this in good faith, I think probably made a mistake regarding the fact that Metro was able to grab that very flexible RFP. And it's been corrected, and we will proceed.
Why didn't we do multiple RFPs? Do we have to do one RFP for all transportation?
Now you know more than I do on that. I would assume we should have been sending several,
Right.
depending about the vendor. But when the RFPs get released to the public for people to join in and see if they're interested, we obviously made a mistake.
Okay, any other questions for you? Okay.
So our departure from community schools, how much is that compounded our transportation issue? And is there any thought behind that model coming back? I just know there are kids that go to Withrow that are being bused from Western Hills, and they're going past, a lot of schools to get over to Withrow. And so I'm just wondering, is that compounding our issue?
Absolutely. What we're seeing is the cost of choice, particularly for our high schools. We cannot afford to have all 15 of our high schools be high schools of choice. It's not sustainable. And we've been saying this on the board for well over 6 or 7 years. The other piece is the neighborhood schools, as you reference, the walkability piece, we've tried to make the neighborhood schools more attractive, and indeed we started to get the enrollment up in our neighborhood schools through Vision 2020, and then of course COVID hit. So the part of the unsustainable part of all of this is the current organization of the district and its 65 schools. It's in part the cost of choice.
Well, can I add to that too, if you're finished?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, we have choice, but we also have consolidated programs. We have construction sciences at Woodward. We have technology at Taft. If we had parity at all of these schools and added all of these programs to all of these high schools, then we would have another huge added expense.
Mhm.
So that's what we have to balance. And that was part of the idea of choice, was the consolidation of programs to save money. And then when we had, an affordable way to transport them, it worked. And now we have to not only rethink going back to, neighborhood schools, but how we're going to deliver the same level of services to our students at each of the neighborhood schools, which is going to be a huge expense.
Yeah, I think Melanie's absolutely right. It's an organization piece, it's an instructional piece, and now with the advent and the increase of our career tech efforts and wanting to have every one of our high schools be a home campus for at least one of the 15 or so career cluster pathways, we have to be looking at, maybe this is one of the few benefits of the whole COVID experience, we have to be looking at ways of delivering instruction regardless of which school you go to. The best example I could think of is the zoo school, which is 48 years old, I think, last year. And we were insisting that you had to enroll at Hughes to be able to go to the zoo school. And of course, they were very protective of that. But the reality is those sorts of options have to be made available to all the high school kids. Or you have to be able to have, you might have to use your, the CDA, the Digital Academy, for more career tech stuff. And maybe we need a training center as well. And this is something Mrs. Mitchell talked about, where indeed the kids are doing things at their regular school and they're doing some stuff certainly virtually, but then maybe there are every 2 weeks there's training sessions. You have Saturday school, or you have facilities like that. So we have to rethink the whole darn thing. But right now we have to figure out how to get the kids to school next year, and also start to reorganize. But I will tell you, the unfortunate thing is everybody's afraid to really open that can, but it has to be open. And that's enrollment boundaries, attendance boundaries, looking at neighborhood boundaries. Our neighborhood schools, many of them aren't even in the neighborhood they're supposed to be in. So we've over time screwed things up pretty well with our efforts to be innovative. And some of it's worked out perfectly, but right now, a lot of things, there's a confluence really occurring as to how we go forward.
And you seem very optimistic about what's happening as far as the support from the commissioners and the change in city council. However, are you still actively planning in the event that it doesn't go well? I mean, are you, so that you're not caught up in the same situation that happened this school year? Are you still actively pursuing that it may not happen with Florida?
I think we have to be ready for the worst case scenario, because we just lived through the worst case scenario, especially the release initially at Metro saying, well, we're not even doing the rest of the year. Oh, really? Now, as soon as that appeared on Facebook, they changed in 4 hours because they finally figured out, well, that sounds really bad. So, and we look stupid, they look mean, and here we are trying to figure out what to do. But yes, we're going to have a plan A, plan B, plan C, and none of it is going to be in isolation from everything else, as Melanie mentioned and as you all have talked about regarding choice.
So you
Want to be superintendent, anybody?
Good question, Clarice. We really have contingency plans.
Yes, excellent.
Okay, any other questions to Eve about transportation? And then I guess the final piece of our audit committee meeting is other business and district updates. And I guess we'd like to know how the superintendent search is going, and anything else that you think we'd be interested in talking about for hearing.
I have 2 items. One is a superintendent search. It is on schedule, perhaps maybe a delay of maybe a couple of weeks. We are anticipating, and Melanie can help me with this, we are anticipating January that we would have some finalists that we'll then be sharing with the community. And the community will have an opportunity to meet with the finalists. And it's our hope that we'd love to, whoever the superintendent is, as that superintendency begins, then it could start mid-year, but more likely than not, unless it's an internal decision, it probably wouldn't start towards the end of the school year. But we are on schedule. We still really like our search firm, the Alma folks out of Chicago. We've been very impressed with them and periodically ask both of their leaders, would you like to be our superintendent? But we haven't gotten a yes from either one of them yet. And so that's the superintendent search, and the board's working hard. And more importantly, we have determined that it will, while January 1 marks the departure of 3 of our current board members, we have determined that in January, when these decisions are being made, and indeed already we have included the newest members in our last 3 or 4 executive sessions. And so we would be asking that the new superintendent would be voted on, if you will, by all 10, and to find a consensus among the 10 of us. So that means that we wouldn't be leaving that person out in the cold necessarily. And it's also forcing the board, new and old, to work together to figure out the best thing for the district. my other item is that as to speaking to the departure of both Mr. Messer and Mrs. Bates, I want to thank them for being such a part of Finance Committee. And most particularly, I want to thank Melanie for being the person that's been a real glutton for punishment. I think most of all of her 20-some years has been on Finance Committee. And I think Melanie and I are now the only ones on the board that were here when indeed the Audit Committee was created. And I really appreciate, because people don't raise their hand when you say, well, you want to be on the Finance Committee. They like to be in student achievement or a few other things, but I am heartsick that Melanie's leaving, but well-deserved retirement, and she's been an incredible force on this board for 2 decades. So thank you, Mel.
Thank you.
Okay, it's 5:53. Anybody want to say anything else, or should we? Okay, then I move to adjourn the meeting. Second from Jim, all in favor? Meeting adjourned.